So the new guard are out in a show of force already, landing first and smashing a grand tournament, so let's take a look at the list used to do so. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today the new Guard Codex seems to be demonstrating its power already. A grand tournament win fairly early on, and we're taking a look at Dan Sammons' list, who used it to take first at the Feliz Exterminatus tournament. Not really too surprised to see the new Guard doing well. They do have a lot of raw power in the Codex, though I'm perhaps not too surprised to see a lot of use of some units more so than others. Lehman Russes and Kazakin were some of the things that I was most excited to get on the table after seeing the new rules. First up though, just to address that Guard at the moment are in a bit of a funny place rules-wise for tournaments and things. They are really in a bit of a limbo state. Games Workshop basically sees their Cadia Stands box set as a preview of the Codex, as opposed to actually having it released on general sale, which it technically isn't yet. So it's maybe a little bit unhelpful for Guard players who do actually have their new book and want to use it in events and things. Practically speaking, I feel like a lot of people who really want to get their hands on a copy of it can. There do tend to be quite a lot of them floating around on eBay. At the moment though, it means that Games Workshop has released the Codex, but not actually changed the balanced data slate, which has a bunch of redundant rules for the Guard on it, and plus a couple of things that were kind of genuinely ambiguous as to whether they'd stay or not, though they since dropped some hints on that matter. It does maybe put tournament organisers in a slightly tricky position though. Some events are allowing the Codex and allowing various combinations of the things in the balanced data slates, but not everything. Some stuff is just kind of unusable with it, such as Hammer of the Emperor, which is clearly replaced by Born Soldiers. A fair few of the events, perhaps some of the particularly big ones, are not allowing the Codex until the general release, and that might keep Guard players' numbers down, at least in the top events, for a bit. As we talked about in a previous video last week, Games Workshop did state that you won't need a balanced data slate when you have the new Codex in a MetaWatch video, but in a bit of a conversational way that didn't really 100% confirm every single bit of the details. From that statement, it does seem very likely that they're probably going to lose Armour of Contempt and perhaps their barrage exemption as well, but it's very much not confirmed at this point, and certainly not in any sort of official rules. As for this event, it looks like they kept Armour of Contempt, but lost all the other data slate buffs, including the exemption to the barrage nerf. I feel that that maybe wasn't an unreasonable decision. The tournament was organised far before Games Workshop dropped that hint, and you can't really change the rules on players a day or two before the event, and even then the hint wasn't exactly an official rule source anyway. Obviously if it goes away, Guard armour will be a little bit less standard, but I still think that Lehman Russes are very, very good indeed. I still think that this list is worth talking about. It's good to see a top list and what works well, putting some of the theory into practice. With all that said then, let's go through the list bit by bit. As mentioned, this list was run by Dan Sammons, who used it to take first at Feliz Exterminatus, definitely a name I recognise on the top tables of tournaments. I think we've talked about lists of his before. The event's a fairly big one with 55 players, and it appears to be a 5-round GT. The Guard list was made out of a single battalion using the Born Soldiers Regimental Doctrine. That's the one that allows you to get auto wounding on 6s at range, better leadership near your officers, and also allows the stratagem that allows you to also wound on 5s for any one unit. That last bit is perhaps particularly nasty when combined with full rerolls like Lord Solar Leontus. If you have one targeted unit, then it means that you're going to be auto wounding with greater than 50% of your attacks. As I'm sure people who have got experience playing against Leagues of Votann will tell you, that's pretty powerful, and I feel like a bunch of the Guard units don't really have the same sort of damage limitations as some of the Votann ones do. A lot of them feel a lot more costed in line with that buff. Admittedly though, this is a fair bit more setup. It's only one special character that gets you the full rerolls. Speaking of which, to lead the army, there's Lord Solar Leontus, 2 command squads and a tank commander. Lord Solar Leontus does appear to be the warlord with Grand Strategist, farming some command points for plenty of stratagems through the game, plus gives you an extra one or the ability to swap out some secondaries if you want. I'm really not surprised to see this guy. I feel like he's often going to be on the table in competitive Guard lists. Full rerolls to hit and wound for one unit with his command phase buff, and he's pretty much the god of orders, being able to order tanks, infantry, and use the Prefector's orders as well as order some unlikely targets like officers as well. He's even got a little bit of countercharge threat as well, about as good as the Space Marine Captain, but really it's his massive buffs that I think are the standout thing. Also in the HQ slots are a couple of Cadian command squads. In these they take a standard medic, Master Vox, melter gun, and a power sword, I believe, on the officer. They give you one order each, and you can broadcast that unit across the field to another Voxcaster unit, as well as extending the range for the secondary and flexible command. The standard gives you reroll 1s to wound for core units, The medic makes the squad a bit more survivable and allows some resurrection, and the power sword and melter gun are pretty reasonable for damage dealers. You may as well take them as they're basically free. One squad takes an ogre and bodyguard with a brute shield, so a 4+ invul there. I'm not sure if Games Workshop were necessarily intending it, but that bodyguard is very tough, and once he dies you can resurrect him for a 1 CP stratagem with the medic, basically meaning that you've got a surprisingly tanky command squad. Seems like it could be a decent choice for doing that secondary objective to hold the middle of the field, or just being a really annoying unit to remove in general. The other squad perhaps takes one of the most interesting relics in the book, in the Finial of the Nemradesh First. That's the standard that allows you to ignore modifiers, damage caps, and feel no pain type saves. Pretty handy against a whole bunch of armies. Will be very nice on the Kazakin and perhaps even the Sentinels here, and making the firepower of the core of the army be particularly brutal. Finally, we've got a tank commander with Gatekeeper, a las cannon, and 2 heavy bolters. Important for those flexible tank orders. Can get you in flexible command if you cluster up all the vehicles, I suppose. And Gatekeeper is just a particularly brutal relic battle cannon in its own right, an average of 8 shots at strength 9, AP 3 and damage 3. You could even have it re-rolling all hits if you really wanted with Lord Solar. Moving on, we've got the squads. To fill out the troop section, there's 3 units of Cadian shock troops, each of which take 2 plasma guns and a voxcaster. A nice minimal amount of expendable obsec bodies there. They're perhaps the ones that you want to have dying on the line, and can use transhuman physiology for a little bit of extra survivability if it happens to help them cling to life or an objective. Currently the squad can double up on special weapons, as the wording on the rule of their datasheet is a little bit weird. My guess is that Games Workshop intended for them not to be able to double up, but they gave them a restriction that basically doesn't actually prevent that. To my knowledge, the sprue only comes with 1 plasma gun, so I wouldn't be surprised if that gets FAQ'd when the Codex FAQ drops. Next up, and perhaps just particularly dominating the list, are 3 units of 10 Kazakin. I was suspecting that people might be running these in transports and things, but it looks like one of them's teleporting in with the Barbican's key, and the other 2 are foot-slogging it, probably popping out from behind terrain. All 3 units pick up 2 hotshot volley guns and a hotshot sniper rifle and a voxcaster. The volley guns are just a direct upgrade on the standard hotshots, and the sniper is actually a surprisingly potent damage 3 shots that could actually seriously worry a character if you get lucky. Otherwise, the squads have some slightly split roles. One of them takes the Barbican's Key relic, which allows you to jump it across the board. That one takes 2 plasma guns, and also has the heirloom weapons trait, allowing you a little bit of extra range. I feel like this is maybe one of the most obvious really strong things in the Guard Codex. Take a squad of Kazakin, buff them up with Lord Solar's rerolls, plus either take aim or first rank fire depending on whether or not you're going for the mortal wounds. Teleport them across the board, and they should do far more than 100 points worth of damage to the enemy army. I feel like a single squad of Kazakin with the Barbican's Key is just about an auto-include territory for basically any guard list. Otherwise, the 2 other squads that are sitting back a bit, they don't actually take any other special weapons despite getting things like melter guns for free. It seems that they're investing more in the hotshots, so I guess maybe the plan is to use first rank fire, second rank fire, and maybe the mortal wound stratagem on those. With first rank, second rank, and plus Lord Solar's rerolls, you'll be getting an awful lot of mortal wounds, and you could divide the shots between the targets so you don't hit the 6 wound cap. One of them takes recon operators for a pre-game move. One of them takes veteran guerrillas. I believe that one's ignoring cover. All of those squads are absolutely terrifying for their cost if Lord Solar's around. Give them an order, rerolls, and stratagem, and they're going to delete something. Finally, last but by no means least, we've got the vehicles. In the fast attack slots, we've got 3 individual scout sentinel units. Each one takes a plasma cannon, chainsword, and one takes a hunter-killer missile. Out of the sentinels, I do feel like the scout ones are my favourite. They give you some very durable units that you can set up in the mid-board and get those objectives early. They're really fast, and the plasma cannon hits fairly hard for the cost. Even if all you want them for is a little bit of extra raw firepower, they could sit next to that Finial standard perhaps. And the addition of the chainswords I think is quite fun. That allows them to be at least a somewhat credible melee threat, maybe killing an infantry unit or 2. Really not bad for 45 points or so each. Then doing a lot of heavy lifting of the list, it looks like. There's 2 units of 2 Lehman Russ executioners, so that's the plasma cannon ones that I feel like look like one of the best on paper. Each one of those will be spitting out an average of 6 or 7, strength 8, AP -4 and damage 3 shots, though they can cause some overcharged damage on the tanks. They also take a las cannon on the hull, and heavy bolter sponsons for an extra 10 points, which seem basically auto-include now. One of them looks like it's going to be a bit more adventurous and push up the field a bit. That one takes heavy flamers instead. To be fair, I think they're a pretty interesting option. Now it's a bit more viable to run Russes forward towards the enemy. It doesn't matter if they get locked up in combat quite so much, as it won't prevent them shooting. Lastly, and perhaps most fun of all, we've got a Death Strike missile making an appearance. 160 points worth of Mortal Wound Panic. basically making your opponent either have to get out of the way or take a whole bunch of mortal wounds. Kind of fun to see one of these guys used successfully. I must admit, maybe I thought its bark was a bit worse than its bite. I'm still not 100% convinced we'll see them too regularly when tournament lists stabilise a bit more. Not really sure how it was used, to be honest. Certainly is very good for area denial and can make it very awkward to get enemy troops on objectives and things. If anyone has any further details as to how it was played, I'd be all ears to hear. In terms of secondaries, Best Coast pairings doesn't actually record them, but just taking a look at the list, two of the better guard ones, Inflexible Command and Boots on the Ground, look very achievable for a decent amount of points. There's enough infantry units that you could easily be racking up the Boots on the Ground point for quite a long time. The Barbican's Key one could perhaps be good for another one early in the game if it jumps into the enemy half, and there's that very tough command squad that could park a regimental standard in the centre of the board against some lists. Inflexible Command looks like it would be pretty achievable as well. Perhaps the main issue with that one might be trying to get vehicles in range of that tank commander, which I think is the only one that you could be. But to be honest, you'd still rack up really quite a high score if you just literally went for keeping those infantry within the Voxcaster ranges and killing things with orders. Even if you only managed to score the vehicle bit a couple of turns, that would probably be enough to give you a decent shot at 15. In terms of armies they played, in order it was Eldar, then Orcs, Word Bearers Chaos, Tyranids with Leviathan, and then Chaos Knights in the last game. Definitely a pretty decent mix of some of the stronger armies in 40k, Tyranids in particular. I feel like maybe Chaos Knights in the last game might not have been such a bad matchup for Guard though. I feel like Chaos Knights, perhaps even more than Imperial Knights, are really going to struggle against them. Knights absolutely hate auto-wounding attacks, and the Leman Russes will tear some massive chunks out of them. In any case, really cool to see a solid performance for the Guard, and perhaps a taste of what sort of lists are looking like they might be strong in the new Codex. I guess the power of this would be cut just a little bit if Armour of Contempt wasn't a thing. It does make the Leman Russes and the Tank Commanders significantly more durable, but even if Guard were to lose it, which I guess isn't 100% confirmed, Toughness 8, 13 wounds and a 2+ save is hardly that bad in terms of toughness. I still think that this list would be very formidable even if they didn't have it. Anyway, very cool to see Guard having some success once more. It's certainly been a long edition of uphill struggle for them. Let me know your thoughts on the list down in the comments, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly be talking more Guard in the future. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page too. You can find that one linked down in the video description below if you're interested. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.